Welcome to Xbox On. Age of Empires 4 is unquestionably one of 2021's biggest PC games, and if you've been playing the series since the Stone Age, you probably already have your plan for world domination all worked out. But if you're a newcomer or are just feeling a little rusty, here are a few tips to help you become a force to be reckoned with.
Even before you've started strutting your stuff out on the battlefield, one of the first things you'll want to do is familiarize yourself with Age of Empires 4's hotkeys. We'll explain more about these as we go, but the gist of it is that in the heat of the moment, trying to pull off complex military maneuvers will be a struggle if you're trying to point and click your way to victory. So familiarizing yourself with the hotkey setup is a must. And if you don't like how the keyboard commands are initially set up, you can always rebind them in a configuration that works better for you. You are the all-conquering ruler of a mighty empire after all, so the W button can do whatever you darn well want it to. My personal favourite one is that you can set different groups for your army to be selected at the press of a key, using Control and a number 1 through to 9 to set the group number of, say, a group of archers. Then, just pressing the number alone will quickly select that group that you so desperately need. The difference between a button press and a mouse command might seem fractional, but when you're facing down the entire Mongolian army, you'll want to make every second count. Get your hands used to these quick-fire commands and you're in for a serious advantage when the arrows start to fly.
The other big thing you'll want to learn about is the 8 civilizations that the game is launching with. The Mongols, Chinese, English, French, Holy Roman Empire, Delhi Sultanate, the Abbasid dynasty, and the Rus. Naturally, each one has its own distinct advantages to exploit. For example, the Rus are great for making a fast start, using their hunting skills to dominate the early ages by poaching wild animals to earn gold, while protecting themselves from the enemy with strengthened palisades. The Chinese, on the other hand, are ideal for playing the long game. They start out with additional villagers and can later use imperial officials to collect gold from nearby buildings, quickly allowing you to become an economic powerhouse. Then there are the Mongols, expert hit and runners, whose early access to cavalry and speed boosting outposts allow them to tear through their enemies without allowing them any chance for a counterattack. And of course, the Holy Roman Empire are absolutely convinced that the big man himself has their back, granting them early access to religious units called the prelates, who can make villagers work faster by quite literally putting the fear of God into them. So choose wisely and make sure to think about the long game when making your selection. Just take a little look through the tech trees for each civilization to see what they have to offer further down the line.
And selecting your civilization isn't where the intel gathering portion of the game ends. No matter the season, the forecast in Age of Empires always includes a whole lot of fog, so you'll want to send someone, ideally someone on horseback, out to have a look around and see what the map actually looks like. You'll need to know where the high ground is so you don't end up fighting an uphill battle, and whether there are bodies of water which might actually provide a naval option, or at least some choice fishing spots. It's also super important to find out where the stone and gold is as fast as possible so you can get to it before your enemy does, and so on. And you'll also need to find a steady source of basic resources like food and wood so you can start building houses, expanding your population, and moving into the more advanced ages. Otherwise, it'll be less Age of Empires, and more Age of very cold and hungry people who will soon be murdered by their neighbours. However, Age of Empires 4's new ambush feature means that you'll want to be especially careful while exploring, since it's now possible for the enemy to hide behind the trees, springing out on you when you least expect it. On the other hand, if you catch the enemy unaware, then you might be able to seize an early advantage.
Once you've chosen your civ and had a little look around, it's time to get on with the actual business of building your empire. One big principle behind any Age of Empires game is learning to both micro and macro manage at the same time. The fate of your civilization will largely be determined by the big picture stuff, like how you build up your economy, develop your armed forces, and expand your territory. From the word go, you'll want to lay out a strategy in terms of what you're going to focus on, what resources you'll need, and how you're going to defend yourself. For example, if you want to tap into the Delhi Sultanate's unique ability to research without spending resources, you'd better come up with a way to protect your scholars while they crack the books. On the other hand, the English castles and longbow specialists are ideal if you want to batten down the hatches, and the French's armoured knights and ferocious cavalry charges are perfect for taking the fight to the enemy. But while long-term planning is important, Age of Empires matches are also all about efficiency, micromanaging your individual buildings and units to make sure that you're always getting in as many actions per minute as possible. Nothing strikes fear into the heart of a seasoned Age of Empires player like the prospect of villagers left idling. So make sure you've got all hands on deck all the time. Something that helped us with this is the idle villagers button that cycles through those lazy villagers that could be and will be blamed for your civ's downfall. Also helpful is the select all idle villagers hotkey, set to control period by default to quickly grab hold of all of them and get them back to work. Balance the micro with the macro and you'll be onto a winner.
Long-term big brain thinking is a huge part of Age of Empires, since you'll be guiding your civilization over the course of a few thousand years if it all goes to plan. That said, your fate can depend heavily on what happens right at the start, because a boxing match might be scheduled for 12 full rounds, but it can still be decided by a haymaker in the first few seconds. In Age of Empires, that haymaker comes in the form of an early rush, a strategy where you attack the enemy as early as possible to try and deal a killer blow before they've even had a chance to fortify. It's a risky move, but one that comes with the potential for a big reward. Even if an early rush doesn't wipe out the opposition altogether, just clobbering a few of their villagers can deal a major blow to their economy, which they'll still be feeling a few ages later. Fortunately, there are plenty of ways to protect yourself against this, like using watchtowers to ensure that you've got plenty of time to shut up shop before they can attack, or distracting the enemy with maneuvers of your own to buy your villagers some breathing room while you get things set up. If you've got villagers working a long way from home, it can also be a good idea to place a building nearby that they can retreat into at the first sign of trouble, using the Seek Shelter hotkey to send them running, and then the Return to Work one to get them back out again once the coast is clear.
If you're playing as the Mongols, you'll have the ability to pack up any of your buildings on the fly and plop them down somewhere else, granting you an amazing degree of tactical flexibility. But when you're crafting things to last, where you decide to put your buildings can be absolutely crucial. Some decisions are kind of no-brainers, like making sure the buildings you use to store resources are close enough to the resources themselves so that your villagers aren't spending ages toddling between the two. And here you'll find using the F keys to select all of one type of building can be a huge time saver, allowing you to grab all your military production units at the same time, for example, to make sure that they're all churning out soldiers. But you can get a bit more devious by building houses in a winding pattern around your town centre to provide you with an added layer of protection, forcing your enemies to cram themselves through a narrow pathway before they can get within striking distance. On the other side of things, if you've got the enemy under the cosh, then it could be an idea to start building barracks right up next to them, allowing you to pump out a steady stream of soldiers to keep piling on the pressure. It's basically the medieval equivalent of a gegenpress. Another new feature for Age of Empires 4 is the ability to have your units climb up onto the walls and fight from there. Line the wall with archers and you'll find they take less damage than normal while also receiving a handy range boost, making for a pretty fearsome defensive perimeter. Be warned though, if the enemy blows a hole in your wall with a trebuchet or hits it up with a siege tower, they'll be able to clamber up onto it and take the stat boosts for themselves.
Age of Empires gives you plenty of freedom to focus on noble pursuits like city planning and scientific research, but you also have to be prepared for when things get a bit less civilized. Whether you're looking to strike out and conquer your enemies or just want to be ready for when they come a-knockin', building up the right sort of army is hugely important. Combat in Age of Empires works partly on a rock, scissors, paper basis. Archers can pick off infantry from afar, but will get torn to shreds by a cavalry charge, and so on. So having the right balance of different units to counter the enemy is vital. For example, if you're up against the Mongols, then you'll want to get yourself some guys who are good against horses, like a spearman, or, even better, the Abbasid dynasty's camel archers, who can reduce the damage done by enemy cavalry while peppering them with arrows. Similarly, if you're worried that the English are going to hide away in their castles, you'll want to deploy a good siege weapon to break down their defenses, like the Chinese fire lancers. It's also worth considering how big a force you want to maintain, because while the idea of swarming across the map with the biggest army ever known to man does have its appeal, you'll still want to think about efficiency. There's no use spending all your resources developing soldiers if they're just going to spend ages standing around doing nothing, especially when you could be making villagers instead to gather more resources and do vital research, allowing you to build better armor and weapons for your military instead of just supersizing it. After all, your mighty troops won't do much good if they're wielding outdated weapons because you ran out of resources before you could upgrade them. You don't want to bring sticks and stones to a trebuchet fight. Trust me.
Another one of the core tenets of Age of Empires philosophy is adapt or die. Whenever you start a new game, you should definitely form a clear idea of how you want to approach things, but from there on, you'll pretty much have to wing it. You may have wanted to win by building a wonder, only to end up short on resources. Or maybe you were going to use the Mongols' military might to seek a conquest victory, but got outmaneuvered early on and had to retreat. Age of Empires intentionally makes it impossible for you to plan for everything, so that you have to work things out on the fly. This is a real-time strategy game after all, and the spoils will go to whoever can strategize most effectively when the pressure is on. You never know whether your enemies are going to go straight for the jugular or sit home building up their forces. You can't tell where your resources will spawn and how quickly you'll be able to harness them. And of course, life will always still be full of those funny little accidents, like one of your villagers being trampled by an elephant. Ultimately, it's all about responding to what happens in the match and finding a way to counter it.
The final big thing you need to always keep in mind is the way the game moves through different ages. One approach is to rush through them as quickly as possible to create a technological mismatch. Rolling up with a fleet of rockets to take on a civilization that's still struggling with the concept of the wheel certainly puts the odds in your favour. And it's always a good idea to get out of the first stage as quickly as possible, since the equipment available to you there is so basic. But spending less time in each age also gives you less opportunity to strengthen your economy and swell your numbers, which could come back to haunt you when your less sophisticated but far more numerous neighbours come round to kick your fancy butts. And you'll need to think carefully about how you manage your resources through the ages too. It can be wasteful to spend too much time at the beginning mining for shiny stones when you really need food and lumber. But at the same time, you don't want to stockpile stuff so much that you end up with a huge pile of it in the later stages where it's no longer anywhere near as valuable to you. Fortunately, there are a bunch of hotkeys that are just great for this. If you reckon you've got enough stone to last an age, you can use Ctrl S and Ctrl K to cycle through your stone collecting villagers and quickly reassign them. And the same goes for all the other resources. Similarly, once you've moved through a few ages and have building options from various periods, you'll find the select buildings from age hotkeys especially useful to cycle through them more efficiently. So hitting the R key will let you jump straight to your age 4 buildings, letting you get straight to your newest, shiniest toys. Basically, all the decisions you make have to take into account your current needs as well as those you'll have in a few centuries' time, so no pressure.
Naturally, we're really just skimming the surface of the deep tactical machinations that go into Age of Empires. The reason these games remain so unfailingly popular is that you can play them for years and still find yourself uncovering new ways to play. But hopefully we've at least given you enough to get started with. Let us know any of your favourite stratagems in the comments below, and be sure to like, subscribe and ring the bell for all the latest Xbox news. Bye!